I learned something, and maybe it can help you. The past 3 weeks have been incredibly busy, and the analogy that I found after struggling to relax over the weekend was once again from the inspiration of nature. So, nature, we know whether you live close to the ocean or the Thames River or somewhere, that high tide and low tide is quite real, and that both are necessary. We can't just have high tide, and in fact, excessive high tide can cause flooding and damage and erosion. We need the low tide. However, sometimes low tide is seen as not as elegant, right? Because it forces things to settle, to slow down, to maybe even stop. And what happens with low tide is things get revealed that aren't there, that aren't visible in high tide. And I remember when I lived close to the Thames River in southwest London, I'd be amazed at how when I walked along Putney and Hammersmith Bridge, the things that you'd see in low tide, like bicycles and broken furnitures and bottles and like all kinds of things. And so when we force high tide, as I had to, I just had so many deliverables over the past 2, 3 weeks, 16 presentations, oh my goodness. And some things I couldn't say no to, or maybe chose not to, because we know high tide and the fast pace of being productive and in the flow can be, dare I say, very addictive. And it struck me how when I had an opportunity to stop, my hyper-aroused nervous system really struggled. And then things came up, like I got a little fever blister. I couldn't sleep even though I was feeling really tired. And that's when I realized I forced the high tide. I created an imbalance. And that was revealed to me in the low tide. And it was messy and muddy. And do I like those parts of myself where I struggle to say no, where I constantly feel busy and part of my self-worth is attached to success and achievement? No. And so what I learned was two things. And perhaps you could ask yourself this question, do you value low tide? Strategic stopping, the elegance of being able to settle as much as high tide? And if you're struggling with it because your high tides are too excessive, how could you bring in more of those moments of rest, knowing that they are incredibly important? And if we don't, then the undermath, the messiness, the muddy, the having to stop can be terribly difficult and bring up all kinds of things. And in those instances, have you got resources and people to support you? Because we can't just have productive, high-flowing, good moments. We absolutely have to have the sadness, the melancholy, the messiness, the frustration, the sadness, the grief, especially during these incredibly difficult times. 2 years ago, when we were lucky enough to still meet easily, I was in a beautiful venue, Broughton Hall, with beautiful friends. And what I took as what I thought was quite a simple gift, was to give everybody a little personalized message, which I put into a bottle. And what touched me was how for months afterwards, some of the people that received those messages commented and said, Celine, thank you. I've got your little bottle and the message, and it inspires me. And then I realized, actually, this is something we can do. Can you write yourself a little message in a bottle? Something that you can read when you're potentially stuck in a bit of a low tide and maybe feeling messy, muddy, unsettled, struggling. So in those moments when you're feeling good, so not a message of distress, sometimes messages in a bottle are poetic in nature, and romantic even. Write yourself a little note. And if you don't need this, maybe there's somebody else that does. I have a dear friend that left me a beautiful message just this past weekend. And this was my message in a bottle this week. And it made me realize, actually, I'm going to do that exercise again for a few others that I think or sense may need it. So I hope that this helps. And please remember to always look to nature. She has such incredible advice and guidance to help us with recovery. One such example as the natural oscillation between high productivity and the necessary low tide and rest in order to sustain that.